the lowest minor grade at the end of the year.
Right, so you get 2 drops for homework. One per quarter, although we don't have quarters anymore, so you get 2 per semester. Because sometimes you lose it, and sometimes you get to do it. But if you get to do it more than twice, or if you lose it more than twice, well, that's on you.
When are you going to do that by?
It's already done. It's set up in the system.
I already finished my paper, and if I want to give it to you early, do I need to like print it out and give it to you, or do you kind of share it?
Right. You can share it with me, but if you want me to take a look at it, do you want to turn it in Wednesday or next week?
Wednesday.
Yeah. So I got thesis tomorrow.
Oh, okay.
I just found out I'm doing more than I thought I was originally going to do because one of the teachers can't do it. So there's no way I can get to it and get it back to you by Wednesday. No. In fact, I think it said on there if you want it, you need to turn it in at least the week before, the Friday the week before. So if you turn it on Friday, I would have gone over it. And I was going to try if you turn it in today, but I now know there's no possible way I can get to it.
Today's Monday.
There was like one homework that there's only one that I haven't done.
All right, ask me in class. I'll look at it.
I thought it was Tuesday.
Oh gosh, not Tuesday. We have a history.
It said 20 or 30. Then I looked up on the past grades, and it's been 20.
Oh my.
So I said it's 20 or 30. I don't know, something like that. When I looked at it, it's 20 every year. Huh?
Did you add it?
It's in. It is in. If you did it and you got it all right, it's in there. It's part of your grade. All the drops are in there as well. Okay, let's look at number 1 on page 311. Which of the following processes requires DNA replication? Francie, which one of those requires the replication of DNA in order to happen?
C mitosis.
C mitosis, that's right. What is mitosis?
It's when it's when it replicates.
What?
DNA.
So what is mitosis?
It's when the cells split.
The cell split, you're right. And in order to split the cell, we need to have how much DNA? Twice as much, right? We need to have twice as much. You're right. Okay, so that's why we need it. It doesn't happen during mitosis. Remember, it happens during S phase of interphase, but it's necessary for mitosis because if you're going to divide the cell, you need a double amount of DNA. In which of the processes does DNA unzip, Sarah?
The transcription replication.
That's right. Because in translation, we don't actually directly involve DNA. Okay? So it's transcription replication. Which DNA strand matches to the DNA strand shown, Elizabeth?
A.
That's right. TACGAT. TACGAT is going to fit our ATGCTA. Which of the following nucleotide chains would be part of a molecule of RNA? Which one of those would be RNA as well?
A.
Why would A be RNA?
Because that's T.
But so does B.
Oh.
And so does C.
Yeah.
And RNA doesn't have T.
Yeah, I think I don't know what I was thinking on this one. D.
Okay, how'd you know?
Because it has U.
And it doesn't have
T.
That's right, because T is in DNA, U is in
Yeah.
RNA, right? John Clark, which of the following mRNA codons would cause synthesis of a protein to terminate? Which one of those is a stop codon?
C.
C is a stop codon. Not the one I always mention, but UAG and UGA are both stop codons. And there's a third one that's U something, I don't remember what. Sarah?
Is another reason on number 4 that the other ones can't be because they don't start with the little AUG? Because they don't have to start with AUG?
Well, if this was the beginning, that would be true, but it didn't tell us we're at the beginning. Does that make sense? So we could be midway through, because it says part of a molecule. Although you're right, it does start with AUG. But if it was beginning, that would be the beginning. But we're not told
If
the
like
beginning.
you're like in the middle of like on the letters and you see AUG like again, does that ever happen?
It won't. Well, you'll see AUG together, but it'll be something like GAU, right, and then GCA. So they won't be a codon. They'll just be together. Does that make sense?
Is there going to be like a question and test that we're going to need a chart?
So you don't have to memorize the chart, right? So if there is a question on the test that would require a chart, I would have to give you a chart. Does that make sense? There are 2 codons at least you have to memorize, though.
UAG and
So
AUG.
UGA is a what codon?
stop.
And what's the other one you're going to need to know?
AUG.
Which is start. And that codes for what?
RNA.
No, which amino acid? Methionine.
Methionine.
Right. So You need to know AUG codes for methionine. You need to know that you need to know at least one stop codon. Okay. And then the rest you don't have to know. If I ask you a question about it, there'd have to be some way for you to tell. There'd have to be a chart or something like that on there. Okay. A DNA sequence for ACC would create an mRNA codon for which amino acid? Okay, so we have DNA here, but what's our chart describe, Kaylee? RNA. So what do we have to do to that DNA? Okay, and so if the DNA says ACC, what will the RNA say? Not AGG. UGG. UGG, right? And what does UGG code for? Tryptophan.
Yeah.
Tryptophan. That's right.
Wait.
I'm waiting.
What?
I thought if you got RNA, the U is on what takes the place of T.
Right. So A normally bonds to T, right? So instead of bonding to T, it'll bond to U. So A bonds to U in RNA. So remember, we're seeing what they bond with, right? We're not replacing them. Okay, so A is U, C to G, U, G, G, UGG. You ain't got no alibi. All right, number 7, the genetic code. What don't they give her? All right, genetic code for an oak tree is, warning, trick question here. What did you put here, John Michael? A, while the sequence of the code is more similar of an ash tree to a squirrel, the actual code itself is made up of what?
Octopus.
The actual code itself is made up of. So what's the genetic code made of?
You have the wrong homework.
What is the code of life made of? What's the chemicals?
They're called, like the nucleotides?
Sure, but all those nucleotides together make.
Oh, see.
No.
Okay, did not. Where can I find it?
In your head.
Well, my head is kind of
So, what is the code for life?
DNA.
So, what kind of code does a oak tree have? What's it made of?
Like, what do you mean?
So, literally, our language is made up of the Phoenician alphabet, right? So, what is their language made up of? Which you just told me.
DNA.
What is an octopus's code made out of?
DNA.
So, they actually have the same code as an octopus. Does that make sense? But the question is so awkwardly asked. I'm just telling you, this is what the answer they want. While they have the same code, they don't have the same sequence, right? They will use the same alphabet. It's a bit like saying the Bible has the same code as Twilight, right? Because they're both, at least our translation of the Bible is
Wait,
English.
so A and D are both
The sad.
So D would be the most true here, but A, if you assume the normal meaning, A would be true, right? If you assume it says what are the similarities between the actual sequence, A is the right answer.
What's the point of asking that question?
To make you, I imagine they're trying to make you think. In fact, it said on the answer D, remember the genetic code is the same for all living things.
Okay.
So it wants you to,
Use the same genetic code.
it is.
So why is it- Wait, it says
So it says more similar.
all organisms use the same genetic code.
Right, and so I want you to remember that. That being said, when you say the same code, you can mean literally the same sentence,
Yeah, it's the
or you
wrong
can mean
one.
like
No, I
Morse
can't
code.
find the right one.
Does that make sense? So it's a bad question. I'm not going to argue with you. Assuming the meaning to be what it would make the most sense, you'd say A, but what it actually wants is D here. Okay. Now, while you do need to know that organisms, all life has DNA as its code, it's also important to know that the closer organisms are related to each other, the closer they are in their DNA code. For instance, genetically, what are you the most like? A chimpanzee, right?
Yeah.
Remember we talked about this, you're 98% identical, 98, 99, depending on how you measure it, percent identical to a chimpanzee, and only 50% identical to a banana, right? Which still seems like a lot for a banana. But that's because banana still has to do respiration, right? It still has to make sugars and proteins, and you do that too.
I hate filthy bananas too.
Bananas are good.
Well, then wash them. Okay, so we have number 8. Which of the following base pairs would not be found in a cell? Catherine, which one of those would not exist?
C.
thymine and uracil, that's right. Even though they actually both want two bonds, they are both, in fact, pyrimidines and won't bond. They're also not even found in the same material. One's in DNA, thymine, one's in RNA, uracil. A protein is assembled amino acid by amino acid during which process, Aaron? This is translation when we make the protein. So in transcription, we're not using amino acids, right? In transcription, we're turning DNA to mRNA. But when we get to translation, we're bringing tRNA in to carry amino acids to our ribosomes to leak in order to make our proteins. A deer is born normal, but UV rays cause a mutation in its retina. This deer should have worn sunglasses. Which of the following statements is least likely to be true? Brianna. Why is the mutation not likely to be passed on? Sure. Where did the mutation happen? In the eye. And do deer use their eyes to reproduce? No. So, if this was passed on, yes, you don't need to come up with ways, Mary. No. Okay. So, what kind of cells do they use to reproduce? Not eye cells, but what? Sex cells. So, if the mutation was in a sex cell, it could be passed on, right?
Have you ever done a biology class and somebody had no idea how sex worked, and so they didn't like
Other than you?
Well, I had a funny.
If that's the case, why was like the family gene? Like, why did that get passed down?
Right. So it would take place in the grandparents. It wasn't a mutation, if you remember. It was something turning on and off.
Oh, okay.
So once it got turned on, it'd be turned on throughout the body. So they actually didn't have new genetic material. It's just the family gene was turned off, which is why it can be passed down if it happens in the body rather than it happens in the gametes. Because that's what's different. In fact, when they first discovered it, a lot of scientists said, no, that can't happen. We know only things that are passed down through genes, and so they had to do a whole bunch of studies. And now it's pretty obvious that genes can be turned on and off, and so that's a different type of inheritance than genetic. It's the intron. It's called methylation. They put a little tab on them, and the tab is an attachment point for RNA polymerase. And if the RNA polymerase can't attach, it won't read it. Does that make sense? Okay. Where are we now? 11. In the process of blank, enzymes make an RNA copy. An RNA? Why ain't ribo? It should be a RNA. Whatever. A RNA copy of an DNA strand. Murray, what process is that?
Replication.
Not replication. Replication makes more DNA from DNA.
Dang it.
Did we make more DNA here? What does it say? So what makes RNA out of DNA? What turns DNA into RNA? So what step will turn DNA into RNA? Oh, you look it up. So we learned 3 processes. Transcription. Transcription is what turns DNA into RNA. So what does replication do, Murray? The DNA. So there's no RNA involved there, right? What does transcription do? What type of RNA? That's right. And what does translation actually do? The third process we learned. So in transcription, we turned DNA into mRNA. What are we going to do with the mRNA? And what's the ribosome going to do? Okay, so translation is turning mRNA into, you said it. What was the point? Protein,
Okay.
right? Replication makes more DNA. Transcription turns DNA into mRNA. Translation turns mRNA into what? Protein.
Wait,
How does tRNA fit into
Said that too
this?
fast.
tRNA is involved in translation. It carries the amino acids to the ribosomes,
Okay.
right?
In the RNA? Wait.
In translation to the ribosomes,
They're going to what too?
amino acids. They make the protein, right? So the mRNA is the instructions on how to build. tRNA are the trucks. They deliver the supplies,
Which is amino acids.
which are amino acids. Ribosomes put some amino acids.
Will you repeat that sentence one more time? You said transcription goes DNA to RNA. What were the other two?
So what does replication do?
Replicates it,
Replicates what?
the DNA.
Okay, what does that mean?
It's like, is that mitosis?
It has to happen before mitosis.
Is that interface of mitosis, basically?
Yeah, so it just makes copy, right? Replication copies DNA. What does transcription do?
Right. That's the DNA to RNA
Right? mRNA.
to mRNA.
And what is translation?
Is that reading it?
Getting the meaning out, right? And what's the meaning of the code?
The amino acids and the codons and stuff?
Well, no, I mean, the codons are the words, right? So the meaning is protein. So translation is mRNA into protein. Okay? Now, obviously, we learned way more about how that works, but that's what's happening in each step, okay? Number 12, RNA copy that carries information from DNA in the nucleus into the cytoplasm is called what kind of RNA? Mark? This is number 12. And what does the M stand for? Messenger RNA. Messenger RNA. Number 13, DNA is copied before a cell divides in a process called what? Replication. That's right. Copying the DNA is replication. Number 14, molecules of blank bring amino acids to the blank for assimilated proteins. Who carries the amino acids, Karis? tRNA. And it carries them to where? The ribosome. That's right. What do we call the shape of DNA, Francine? A double helix. Nucleotides form base pairs through a weak bond called a what? What else? I'm sorry, 16. RNA has ribose. What does DNA have? Deoxyribose, right? It's right in the name. So RNA, the R is ribonucleic acid, excuse me. That's also why we call it a ribosome, right? It's a body made of ribose. DNA is deoxyribose or deoxyribose. What do we call those weak bonds, Elizabeth?
Nucleotide bonds. Simple bonds.
Okay, what are simple bonds that are easy to make and easy to break?
No, hydrogen.
So hydrogen bonds, right? They're simple charged bonds.
The answer.
That's the answer.
Wait, what was
Do you not?
Hydrogen bonds.
Oh, yay.
So, hydrogen bonds, remember, how many hydrogen bonds does adenine want to make?
3.
2. How many does guanine want to make?
3.
3. That's why they don't bond together, right?
Yes.
2 and 3 doesn't match. So, who also wants 2 bonds that will bond to adenine? Thymine and uracil. And who also wants 3 bonds, so he'll bond to guanine? Cytosine, right?
I thought it was 1 and 2.
I thought it was 1 and 2 too with the rings.
That's right, we're talking about hydrogen bonds.
Where are we talking about now?
Same spot.
I found it.
Yeah. Okay, so let's take a look at number 18. A female lab rat is exposed to X-rays. Its future offspring will only be affected if the mutation occurs in what type of cells, Isabel?
Reproductive.
Reproductive or gametes or sex cells or germ cells, all of these apply the same terms.
On my last question, I was looking at homework from a few weeks ago. But now I have the right homework. If you were wondering, like when I showed it to you, that was the wrong homework, and this is the right one.
Oh, I just believed you.
Yeah, but I thought that it was the right homework because it had 20 questions.
I believe you now. So you got away with cheating. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And you got like Padlet on yourself, so you got a full cheating. All right. 19. Chemical Q causes the following change in the sequence of nucleotides. What kind of change is this, John Clark?
I don't know what chemical Q is, for one.
Why would that matter?
I don't, because it asks what chemical Q is.
Well, not right here, it doesn't.
Yeah.
What kind of mutation is this? So in the picture.
I don't even see. Oh, that's a. There's a. Oh. All right.
So
A
what
translocation.
changes from the left side to the right side?
The G.
Changes into a
T.
So how much changed?
1.
What do we call it when one letter and one letter only changes?
Hold on.
Hold on. What do we call it when one letter and one letter only changes?
Yeah. No. So is it one of the mutations? Is it translocation?
We had a change, right?
Yeah.
Translocation is when what happens?
Oh, is it a point mutation?
What's the point mutation?
That's when only one letter changes.
Oh.
Funny how that works.
There we go.
When only
So,
one letter only.
When only one letter changes, we have a point mutation. Now,
Yes.
we didn't talk about this, but I'm sure you've heard this term before, and of course it was in your book. What do you call a chemical that causes a mutation? If you're a big fan of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, they were covered in this slide. It's called a mutagen. A mutagen is a chemical that causes a mutation. And if mutation causes cancer, we call it a carcinogen. Remember that term,
yeah.
carcinogen? A carcinogen is a mutagen, but it causes mutations that lead to
So
cancer.
chemical Q is a mutagen?
Mutagen.
Okay. But you said something else too, so I got confused.
If it causes cancer, it's called a carcinogen.
So the first like point mutation is
Point.
one mutagen.
That's right. And last one, Kaylee. DNA blank is necessary before a cell divides. What does DNA have to do before it divides? That's right. DNA replication. That's right. DNA has to copy before you're going to split it apart. Is that rough?
Okay, so like a few days ago we had the homework, like at the end of the chapter review, and you said we weren't gonna go over it, but when you're reviewing, if we had any questions.
This is it.
No, not this one. Like I think
a lot of
like
it.
the very
Do we not go over?
We did go over that.
I don't.
Wait, isn't that what
we're
this
not
was?
gonna go over.
That was what you just, that's what we just did.
That makes up protein.
We did go over it.
Well, can I talk about that?
You absolutely can. You absolutely can.
It was the one that talks about what would happen if the stock codon wasn't there.
Uh-huh.
Was it just that like the protein would keep going and change
But remember, how did proteins function based on their what?
shape?
Shape. So if we made it longer, it would change the function, and that's a bad thing. Okay. Any other questions? Now, unlike usual, that review was not on everything we covered. Actually, never on everything we covered. But we covered some part of Chapter 12. We're not going to do Chapter 12 review because only about a third of the questions on there cover stuff that we covered in class. So it's not a bad idea to look over Chapter 12, but only look at the parts that we covered in your notes. So if it's something that's not in your notes, don't worry about it. Chapter 11, you need to know all of them. And of course, as always, you need to know everything that's in your notes. You need to be able to do a pedigree, read a pedigree. You need to be able to do a Punnett square for codominance and incomplete dominance, and even sex-linked traits. You need to know what our processes are: replication, transcription, and translation, as well as how changes, mutations can occur. Margaret. Sure. So look at the pedigree, right? There's what you got right there. Now, just by looking at that, tell me what's dominant, filled in or empty?
Which page is this?
I don't know.
Okay, so if filled in was recessive, right? So this is filled in, right? That's
Do you know what kind of color you're making?
No. If this trait was recessive,
It's a tooth stock.
okay, then both their parents would have to be, let's say, this is called little r, right?
Hey.
Which means all their children would be the
No,
same.
don't turn it off.
Look at the dogs.
Are all their children the same?
No.
So this can't be recessive.
You exit out.
It has to be dominant, right?
There you are.
And they have to be heterozygous, because that's the only way to have a recessive child. Remember the Punnett square
Sure, I
unit?
thought I did more.
So you know that's dominant, right? And you know they are heterozygous.
Ooh.
Now let's look over here. Since we know that's recessive, what must her genotype be?
Wow.
So it's the only way she can be recessive.
What?
It's not a picture.
Look at her. It's like an old person. Oh, would you look at that?
That's right. So we know what she is, right?
Let me get my nostril.
Now, how do we know what he is? He's dominant, so he's got at least one big letter. But if he had two big letters, what would all his children be?
I can't see.
That's right. Are they? So what must he be?
They.
Right?
I'm gonna give her a nice
Oh, I would ask. In fact, what I'd probably
a
ask.
ground.
Right?
I was in that.
And then you could write them out. But I'd ask. Yeah, if you get a pedigree on your test, draw all over.
Joe Michael, it's your girlfriend. Say hey to Sergey. Don't put it on me, don't put it on me.
Yeah. So
Hey,
every
hey,
word
hey,
now it's down.
Hey, you.
Right? So why is everything on there?
Every time. Every single
Let me
time.
see the button. Let me see my
Oh,
button.
you
Let me
click it, you care,
Let me-
right? Or whatever that thing is, right? So that's the
Oh,
thing
it
you
flew
care
across
about.
the screen.
Instead of writing, like you have right here, oh, here, that's the letter. Here's the sex, like you have to make clear, it's an X or it's a Y.
It was square.
So it's exactly the same, right?
Look, you gotta do one of these.
Look, Sergey, it's the picture, please.
Squared, right? So you-
Haley,
Okay, so you get this from mom, or
watch my screen.
you get
Can
this
I
from
bite your
dad,
face?
or-
Huh?
You're gonna break your finger.
Uh-huh.
He done like
And we
that.
do-
on me.
Yeah, Y's on both sides.
No,
Hi.
You're gonna break something.
I use this every day.
You're gonna break something.
Wait, get out of it. Show my
How am I supposed to do what is it? Teleport?
So that's from the very beginning.
Wait, he moved.
Was that class? So the first two homework you did them. They didn't count.
Apparently he really wants to talk to her.
He has bald head.
Have y'all FaceTime? You.
Can you FaceTime me? I mean, Italy?
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's look at these.
They still have that over
They
there.
don't believe
No, I mean, like, with somebody in the U.S.
So they are recessing.
It's a black.
I wrote her a letter, but I don't know what her address is.
Say they little r. Because homozygous recessive
her,
always
Taylor.
He's gonna get super confused.
She's gonna have a nausea attack.
Their children is this one. But are their children all the same as them? Good. You don't?
Hey, just do it this way.
You do it. I will fight you.
I'm gonna give you instructions.
But if they're dominant, are they going to be homozygous dominant?
Stop.
Heterozygous.
Hey,
That's what that kid. So we know they're both heterozygous. And we
Get
know
out of here.
Mom has dominant. What?
She doesn't care.
So if
She
you're
does,
sending
actually.
your house,
I'm sorry.
You zoom.
well, no, because then if it's dominant,
Dude.
right?
Yeah, you can.
On the screen, you zoom in on the screen, you didn't zoom in on the video.
Here, I'll get it closer to Mr. Miller.
No, don't stop.
So he's either homozygous dominant or heterozygous, right? If he was homozygous, he would
Bingo.
give all his kids a dominant allele, right?
Oh, I made it better.
And so they would
Stop,
all
it's
look
busy. Stop.
like him.
It's busy.
Do they all look like him? So what does he be?
I just thought maybe you need to leave it alone because it's busy.
There.
No, no.
It's just like
Thanks,
what's
busy.
the other one? It's just like 3 hours.
Every time it pans to her, she does, what is your sister?
Right, so you can't use the same lettering. You have 2 dominants. And so if we're doing blood type, you have actually 3 alleles. You have allele A, allele B, and allele O. Alright? These 2 are
I'm
dominant.
gonna throw up.
That's recessive. Okay? So, if you get A and B, instead of one of the many, what kind of blood do you have? AB. If you have AO, what type of blood do you have? A. You have BO.
Say hey.
Well, it depends on mom and dad. So if the mom's O, it has to be like this, right? If dad
Male bonding.
it has to be.
So there's still only one letter in
You're so dumb.
But so instead we have 3 choices here, right?
She
That
still
means
need
we
it?
go a little off. We
She's
have
gonna
A
watch it.
or B, or B.
So there's no, like, there's no other A, the biggest, like, all gone.
Right, because we have 2 that are dominant.
And then
Got her. And so it goes the same, except that you have to include the X and the Y. And the Y won't have a trace, right?
Deflected.
You can't
Well,
deflect it.
Yeah,
we're talking about boy or girl here, right?
Deflect anything.
So we have mom like that, dad like that, but the gene will only be on the X. So how many does dad have to offer?
No.
1, and it means all the sons will have only 1 trait. Only 1 allele, excuse me. That's right, so whatever, let's say it was, let's say it was tallness, right?
Actually,
Mom could be
most of the
heterozygous
time I don't
tall,
like you.
dad would be short, right?
98% of the time I don't like you.
Yeah, feelings mutual.
The only time I like you is when you bring Starbucks to school and you give me a K-pop.
Well,
How many
it's
times
all
have we done that?
right?
Oh,
I was just saying, yeah, that was the latter thing. Yes.
Crazy.
Yeah.
Hi, kids. Do you like butter?
Yeah.
Hey,
Look at bingo.
damn.
So it could not be built.
You're
Right,
no,
this is
I
by Richard Long.
That'd be I'm sorry.
Example from Michael Van. So, because if things evolve, right? Let's say a longer neck, right? So all you would need is sure you can't get from a giraffe, from a deer to a giraffe to a deer, right? What you could get is a little bit longer neck, right? Then a little bit longer neck, then a little bit longer neck, right? And that can grow incrementally. That would make sense as evolving. but the class example is blood clotting, right? Blood clotting takes about 40 different proteins. And the problem is if you take
my blood
and
clots
you build it bit by bit, it doesn't clot all, 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 doesn't clot all clots the last one, right? So there's no reason for it to build one at a time.
You had me at ...
Because it wouldn't help you. It wouldn't be advantageous.
It's probably one of the most incredible things I've ever purchased.
By the one that I don't always be bacon, but when I do it,
Get her to explain it to you.
Right, okay, so you could say,
She totally gets
it
it.
disproves
It
evolution
turned off.
because, and you say it doesn't disprove evolution. What you just said is very conflicting. You said, one, it doesn't disprove.
It's okay, I don't always eat bacon, but when I do.
Prove.
Yeah, but it's not
yeah,
all.
That is, yeah, which is, it disproves, no it doesn't. Okay? Or you could, and this is a little bit, you could say it proves
My
it,
dad.
or it doesn't.
And my
Depending on
mom.
what you're saying.
I
It
was the
disproves
only
it,
kid
no it
there.
doesn't.
Everyone else was like at least 40. And I was sitting in the kitchen and the
yeah.
bartender. And Mom was like, yeah,
Well,
kids
if
might
it's
leave.
that would
I
be
went in the office and I ate my steak on the
Or at
floor.
least, maybe not disprove, but a
Sounds
challenge.
nice.
No. My
Some of
dog
those being
gets
antisocial, and they're the ones that grounded me.
My mom and dad think I have no friends.
Michael Bay,
My father do
thinks
too.
that
My dad said sometimes you just need to get out and do things that you don't, that you're not comfortable
This
doing.
weekend, they were like, please find someone to do something with. We don't want you.
that'd be attacking them.
They tried to make me go to dinner with Jack and Julie, and
And
My
then,
got all
dad my dad
offended.
made me talk. Like, I,
you love that. You can say a couple of, you can say irresistible complexity is true, but that's not. Evolutionary theory is not a problem. Or you
I
can
said no to one thing. Like, I didn't want to get this
Therefore,
bodyguard
can't
because I don't like the
attack
girl.
In
And
fact,
my parents were like,
if you want to show how, so you could say.
My parents think I never do
if it were
anything.
true, it would disprove evolution.
My parents
Then
told me
you
the
say,
same
and we
thing.
know there's a problem.
Like, you work, you have school,
Okay.
you have
But
friends.
you only want to do that if you think both, I mean,
My
you want
parents
to
are so
make the
annoying
strongest possible
sometimes.
case, right?
my parents just like.
I went to a movie with my dad on Saturday. My dad, the last Hunger Games. It's called,
Which one of those are funny?
Boxing Day. But it was fun. We were like the only ones there. It was like 9 in the morning.
Yeah, it's okay. Like yesterday, my mom, or on Saturday, my mom was trying to, she was like, you should invite this person or this person to dinner, and I was like, Mom, you're making not having to eat
So
friends
you probably
really hard right now.
actually, you probably read Origin of the Species, right?
Without the tears, I wasn't actually crying. And then my dad told me that he's been trying to tell me for
Right, so
years
if
that
you
I don't
want to
have
quote
friends.
Darwin for that,
But I'm always like, yeah, I have
Including
tons of friends.
representation, right?